You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers, sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone who lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I'm Cheryl, and I'm a coach who loves working with spiritual abuse survivors and late discovered autistic people learning to love and accept themselves.
And I'm Patrice. I am an IFS, Internal Family Systems Informed practitioner, and I work with autistic women and members of the Irish diaspora.
And I'm Matthew, and I'm an autistic peer support coach and educator and spiritual director who works with any autistic person looking to learn more about themselves. Glad to be here with you guys.
Woohoo! Welcome back to another episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today we are going to talk about burnout. How is autistic burnout different from other kinds of burnout? How does it affect us in our daily lives? What are the best ways to recover from autistic burnout? Importantly, how do we avoid stepping on the gas back into burnout while we're in recovery? This episode falls into the lived autistic experience category, combined with actionable information dealing with burnout. Burnout is a word that gets thrown around a lot, especially on social media. However, autistic burnout involves several unique elements that not only affect us on a personal level, but also connects to deep societal structures connected to productivity and hustle culture. This topic was inspired by Matt, so I'm going to turn the floor over and let them start by giving us a simple definition of autistic burnout and explain some of the pitfalls they've discovered over the years in attempting to recover from burnout.
That's quite an introduction. Thank you, Cheryl. I don't know how to define autistic burnout exactly. I mean, on the one hand, I do. I have my definition of how I view autistic burnout based on having been there twice and working with autistic people in burnout for over 15 years. And my definition of burnout might not actually really sit with everybody necessarily. I think the really good place to start on this is that autistic burnout doesn't have a definition that everybody agrees on. Now, what is everybody, right? Like, are we talking about the academy? Are we talking about psychologists, psychiatrists, according to the DSM, according to autistic people, right? I think that most autistic people probably do have an idea of what autistic burnout is and how it's defined. And maybe some things change, right? So I mean, I have a definition that I work with when I work with people and how my own mind works. But it might not resonate with you, and you might find somebody else, right? I'm sure we'll get comments from people and emails. Oh my God, you didn't mention this part, and this practitioner says this, and that one says this. Autistic burnout is still being defined. You know, that's why people Google it, and there's not that many books out there. Now you can find Dr. Neff's great book on it, and there's a few others out there. But if you did that a year ago, you wouldn't have found any. You know, there weren't that many studies on it. Very few studies that actually spoke to lived experience. Still being defined as a term, right? So, like, take that with a grain of salt. But for me, and I prepared a little blurb, being prepared to give a definition. So I define it as the following. A profound and enduring state of exhaustion paired with a loss of skills and abilities experienced by autistic individuals. Burnout results from the chronic and relentless denial of our fundamental autistic needs, a mismatch between our values and our needs with the reality, and an overabundance of demands and stimuli without sufficient recovery time. It's characterized by several factors, which can all occur. Some of them might occur, right? But a continual sense of emotional and sensory overwhelm, a persistent dysregulation of our nervous system. So, like, we're constantly feeling dysregulated, having more bad days than good days. And alienation stemming from masking and camouflaging, not being heard or understood. And even at times, people disbelieving us or even being hostile to our autistic experience. We go into burnout from yelling into the void about what we're experiencing and not being heard, which is why, and we'll talk a little bit later about like what helps with burnout, but just being in autistic space with other autistic people, that's why it's so healing. Because we go into burnout because of that alienation. That was a lot, so I'm going to take a pause.
That was really good. I feel like we could have an entire episode on every single little piece of that definition. I love it. I'm going to let that stand alone. And I'm just going to say how burnout has shown up in my life, just on a personal level. Because you're right, there is no one standard shared definition. And I think that's really important to stress. But for me, it's like being at the bottom of the ocean, and not in a fun, oh, I get to go scuba diving. It's like I just cannot see the light. I cannot see too far ahead. And sometimes there is a lot of confusion between burnout and depression. And sometimes, even in my own life, I feel like they've kind of interwoven. And, some people will really get nitty gritty with it and say, oh, well, depression means that you've kind of like lost all joy. Whereas, burnout, you still want to do the things, you just don't have the energy. And honestly, sometimes I can't even find the nuance because it seems to be a bit of a sandwich. But for me, that burnout is like everything that is expected of me, it seems impossible. Whether that be work or relationships or basic survival, things that I need for, self-care or even self-maintenance, which seem to be simple for other people. And then when I try, it's just like, well, I kind of woke up today and that was about it. So yeah, there's also a lot of like negative self-talk that goes along with it, because just feeling like I cannot keep up or meet my own expectations. And there just often seems to be like a loss of skills that go along with it, things that maybe I thought I was pretty good at in the past. When I'm in burnout, it is not happening. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now because I want to hear Patrice's definition.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you've both said. For me, it kind of sums up to everything feels intolerable. Like every 5 minutes, it seems like something else intolerable is happening. Either the landscapers are using their leaf blower and it's just unbearable to listen to, or I'm washing a dish and the dish is in the drying rack, but when I pick up the mug, little droplets of water splash on my arm, and that feels just more than I can take. That's when I know I'm veering into burnout again, when these little things are just leave me running for my noise canceling headphones and to get under my covers, under my weighted blanket, and just kind of eliminate as much stimuli as humanly possible.
That's a great definition. And I think it's important to note too that, having a bad day does not mean necessarily that you're in burnout. And sometimes it's really hard to even, I don't know, sometimes it's hard for me to even figure out if I'm in burnout. Just because I have experienced it so many times, I think I'm a little bit hyper vigilant on, oh, am I going back into burnout again? After a couple bad days. So I think this conversation is really important, and hopefully it resonates with a lot of people who either are in burnout or have experienced burnout. One, that there is hope that, we don't have to live our lives in a chronic state of burnout, but just that there's other people out there who've had similar experiences, I think is really important.
So Cheryl, maybe this is a good time for me to add what I was kind of meditating on this weekend. As I've come out of burnout, I was having this realization that in the US, when we had this financial crisis happen in 2008, what preceded it was we were giving mortgages out to a lot of people who it was really risky to give them to. They really couldn't pay them back. I actually know someone who just casually walked dogs and was given a mortgage. And this person said to me, no one should have given me a mortgage. I'm not someone who can reliably pay that back. That was like me before burnout, distributing my energy and my resources everywhere without discernment or paying attention to the risk. And as the financial crisis for the US and for the whole world was the seismic event that really disrupted everything, so was burnout in my body. And what we did here in the US after that is we created much more stringent requirements for getting a mortgage. Now you really need to go through a pretty intense process of questions and proving your income and your ability to pay this money back. So what I'm finding I'm doing with my own energy is kind of a similar internal process where anytime anyone's asking me for any of my time or energy, I'm not immediately saying yes. I am spending a lot of time really rigorously sitting with, how does that feel inside me to think about going to that event, going to that party, taking on that extra work? And whereas in the past, my system was really dominated by just, pleasing others. and there wasn't room for other perspectives. Now I take the time to really listen to other perspectives. Like, I really don't want to go to that party that's in a loud playground area for somebody's little kid, where I won't even get to talk to my friend because she'll be talking to all the other parents there, and I will just be completely miserable because it's way too much noise and activity, and I won't know when to talk or who to talk to. That will deplete my energy. So yeah, that's an actual example I ended up saying no to this weekend. Is I'm sorry I can't go to your party. I don't have the capacity for this. And, it's not easy to do this. It's not easy to say no to someone I've been friends with for 15 years. And, just as the financial crisis created real problems in our system, burnout created such real problems in my system that I really do need to have more stringent criteria for what kind of energetic use I engage in. It's a matter of survival.
Thank you, Patrice. I love that analogy. And hell yeah, on looking out for yourself. I think so many of us are afraid to actually say that. You said that the meltdown, or the financial meltdown, or the financial burnout, let's even call it, of the U.S. economy then, or our burnouts, they change things, but they also reveal things, right? Like, burnout for me is revealing which of our needs aren't actually being met, right? It's what happens when our needs go unmet for so long that, yes, they change everything and they show us what are the systemic issues, right? So this meditation that you've been on of not going back, we hear it all the time, right? In our groups, in our sessions, in our one-on-ones with our autistic peer clients. I wish I could just go back to how everything was before burnout. Burnout was terrible. I just want to go back to how it was before. And it's, honey, no. Before is what put you in burnout. And to go along with Patrice's analogy, a lot of us in our society, in our system in general, didn't always learn. There's some lessons they learned from the financial crisis of '08, but a lot of those same bad things and those bad systemic issues are coming back now. And what I see so often with people in burnout is they don't learn the lesson. They don't start thinking about needs, because thinking about your needs and where your needs are not being met and making big changes in your life, and sometimes they're small changes, but often they can be big changes. That takes work. How often do we hear, I wish I could think about my needs, but I just don't have the spoons. I don't want to think about it. I want to think about it, but I don't have the energy to think about it. But then not fixing the systemic issues, and then you go back into it again. There's a lot of us, and it's super human, it's super understandable. We're afraid to confront the fact that we're not having needs met that maybe actually we can't change and we can't have met. What do you do in that situation? Right? Like, we can make all these laws and pass Dodd-Frank and all this, but can we, not going to change the inherent greed that exists in our financial system. It's going to happen again. But I'm not sure that burnout is a feature and not a bug. I think there is a way of preventing it from happening again.
I think you're both touching on something that is really, really, really important, is that when we're looking at needs, it's good to do an inventory, look at our own lives and look at what needs we have and what needs are not being met. And that's really important. And, I respect that process, but I do also think we have to acknowledge the fact that some needs can be met on an individual level and some can't. Some are collective and some are systemic. And I've sat in workshops that I've run, and I've listened to participants, and they're like, I've gotten really good at meeting X, Y, and Z needs, but these ones here, the ones that depend on other people and relationships and community, they're like, oh, these ones are, it's a journey, it's a process, and it's hard. So I think that's really important. The other thing that jumped into my head while you both were talking was the idea that a lot of people, when they come to us, they often want instructions for how to get out of burnout, right? Like, just give me the 5 steps. And this idea of this one size fits all. And, Matt says it all the time. I've heard this expression, like, we have to filter everything through the lens of our own experience. And a lot of people don't want to, can't, don't know how. There's a lot of different factors in there, because it's hard to say, I do know what I need, but you know what, if I ask for it, maybe this person isn't going to love me anymore, right? Or, oh, if I don't please this person, am I going to have a relationship, right? There's a lot of those, that inner dialogue, that programming. But I think at our core, like, especially as autistic people, we do get used to our structure and routines, and like making massive changes that are necessary to avoid burnout again, right? Like, actually looking at what led to burnout in the first place, and then saying, oh, these are the changes I need to make. Like, that's a massive undertaking for anyone, let alone an autistic person in burnout, right? So, as much as we sometimes gravitate towards isolation while we're in burnout, there's this thing where, that might not be the best option. Trying to find, that community or support is going to be really important in burnout. Just not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I would say, I know for myself, and I don't want to speak for you two, but I wonder if this is true, that part of why I feel so passionately about having free discussion circles every month is to give fellow autistics a place to come and just try out what it feels like for an hour and a half to fully embody what our needs are, and not have to conceal or camouflage. In my own burnout recovery, one of the hardest aspects has been redrawing the lines of what's okay with me with people who've known me for decades or longer, because they're not expecting me to be different. And it has and can lead to a lot of conflict when I show up differently and suddenly I have these needs I didn't have before, and the other person is maybe blindsided or doesn't quite get it, or doesn't actually process that, and then keeps not observing what that need is. So the free spaces do offer kind of this neutral place where you can try out really being exactly who you are, and not needing to come up against people who remember you from who you used to be, a version that is no longer real. Burnout has changed the landscape the same way, the financial crisis changed our financial landscape, the same way COVID changed our whole landscape in so many ways. I think burnout has done that to me on a personal level. There's no going back to how I was before. So our free spaces give us a place to adapt into who we are now, with oftentimes, new faces who don't know us from outside these groups, who aren't pulling us back into who we used to be, who we aren't anymore and can't be anymore.
Yeah, I heard somebody say once in a group, and this phrase has stuck with me. There's a lot of people, as somebody who's, maybe like learning about their autism and going on that journey and, recovering from burnout, as they are starting to make some changes and they are starting to make maybe some new boundaries, there are the people who know and love them the most that can sometimes be the biggest challenge navigating. And this expression, like I said, happened in a group, so I'm not taking credit, but they said, people around me, they're expecting the user-friendly version of me. And I was like, oh, put that on a t-shirt, because that was so big. And it's so easy to go back into the program of, you know what, it's just easier to be what they want. Like, it's just easier to avoid a conflict. It's just easier to say yes. In the short term, perhaps, but the long-term effects of those giving, right? Giving out the mortgages, giving out the spoons, however you want to term it, the long-term effects of that, it's not easier at all. You pay for it for a long time.
And I'd say if what we're saying sounds overwhelming, oh my God, there's no going back, drastic changes need to happen, I'm recalling the advice of, there's a woman called Martha Beck who's a coach, and she talks about this 1% rule. If you ask yourself to just make a 1% change over time, if you're making all these 1% changes, you're really changing the direction of where you're headed. If a boat makes 91% changes over 90 days or 90 months, it's going west instead of north. So breaking it down into smaller components can be helpful if this feels overwhelming.
Yeah, I love that. The small changes. Like, people often think that, like, oh no, like I need to quit my job, I need to divorce my spouse, I need to move to a new country. All examples that I heard in the last few days. And yeah, sometimes it requires a big change. And sometimes a lot of those 1% changes that Patrice just spoke about, that will get you there, right? Like, if I had $1 for every time somebody said, I'm so deep in burnout, I can't do it, a lot of love. I get it. We don't need to do, and like when you watch Instagram and TikTok, you'd think that like you have to make all these big things. This is what the influencer class is teaching us that you have to do. It has to be these big performative actions. No. Maybe it's getting blackout curtains. Maybe it's eating at a certain time of day. Maybe it's going for a walk certain parts of the day and seeing the sunset. And you might say, well, how is that going to change something if I'm working in a job that I don't know. Because when I went into burnout in 2019, there was a lot going on. And I wasn't able to change the biggest things in my life, truth be told. I still deal with them. But I made a lot of small changes. And those small changes, yes, like that's that 1 + 1, that's 1 degree that Patrice is talking about. And also, because I wasn't spending so much energy on those small ones, I was able to have a lot more energy to deal with the bigger stuff that dysregulates me. So now, the big stuff, I can handle. And it doesn't burn me out, doesn't give me nonstop meltdowns. I have the capacity to deal with some of the bigger things, which I can't change, right? I've got POTS. I can't. It doesn't matter how many things I change. Like, I'm always going to have POTS. And I'm going to deal with that. And it's going to be super dysregulating. And it's going to affect my life in lots of ways. I can't change that. But today, I have a lot more energy to manage all the stuff that comes out of that. So, like, you don't need to change your whole life overnight. It's not all or nothing. It's small things. And it takes time to get out of burnout. You got to give yourself grace. You got to give yourself the time. People think that they can hustle and grind their way out of burnout. You got into burnout from hustling and grinding. Not necessarily by choice. I don't think any of us have that choice. If we want to survive in this world, that's what we have to do. That's what we're taught. But you can't rush your way through. You got to be patient. And I know, like, everything in society is telling us, don't be patient. Just do it. Just go to the courses. Just go to Cheryl and to Matthew and to Patrice and Aradia and buy this book and buy that book and buy this workbook and do this seminar. Go. No. Like, getting out of burnout is not like some performative, cool, sexy thing. It's like sitting around. It's how many spoons you have to go to that birthday party. How much can you really read about something? How much can you watch the news? How do you go out and walk when like your whole body is just done? And you got to give yourself grace that like it's not going to go as fast as you want. And like you're not even going to be able to do all the self-care. It's another thing we see, right? Is that people shame others for not practicing self-care. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes you will hustle, and sometimes you're going to do what you got to do to survive, and you got to hold space for that too.
I was just curious, Matthew, when you say people shame each other for not doing self-care, could you explain what you mean by that? I'm not sure. Nothing comes to mind for me, what you meant.
Yeah, so I often see people being like, I know that in order to get out of burnout, I need to take care of myself. I need to eat well, or I need to work out, or I need to meditate, or I need to go to groups. I need to go to free discussion groups where I can be with other autistic people. But you know what? There's at a time where I'm tired, or I'm exhausted at the end of the day because I have to take care of my 2 autistic kids and go to my job and take care of my partner, and I just don't have the energy to even go to that free group. And then I see the comments. Well, you're not really that serious about getting better. You don't really want it. If you really wanted it, you do it. And then people beat themselves up. They go, you know what? Maybe if I did really want it, I would have done it. Maybe I would have done it. And like, that sucks. Like, how many of us have shamed ourselves for not necessarily taking care of ourselves the way we should? I do it all the time. It's important to do that check-in. That, Burnout, you don't go into burnout from one day to the next. It takes months, years to get to burnout. And it can also take months to years to get out of it. You can have good days, you can have bad days. And you gotta be able to sit there with the discomfort of, you know what, maybe I can't practice self-care this week. Maybe this week is really just surviving. Even though I know I need to rest, and you don't need to do that. And also, at the very same time, you do have to want it. You do have to want to get out of burnout also. Now, there's a difference between wanting it but not being able to, and not wanting it at all and saying, you know what, like let's just, you know, I'm just going to be in burnout forever. Which again is also a really real feeling. Like, have none of you ever felt that way before? That it's just always going to be like this? Like, I
For
gotta
sure.
gotta have love for that as well. Like, what do we do in that situation? What do you tell somebody?
Yeah.
One thing I would like to say, maybe this will be a little hopeful, is at some point during my healing from childhood trauma, I did a modality called neurofeedback and biofeedback. And the practitioner told me that memory is state dependent. So if you're in burnout, it actually makes sense that you think it's always going to be that way because it's hard to remember times when you felt otherwise. So I just wanted to put that out there to normalize that it makes sense that during burnout, we might feel like this is all there is, this is all there will ever be. I remind myself of that sometimes. There have been other times when I felt good. It's hard to remember how that felt because right now I don't feel good.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's a couple things that I want to bring into this discussion that have been kind of on the back of my mind the last few days. I watched this video. I cannot remember her name for the life of me, but she was talking about the difference between self-care and self-maintenance. And a lot of times we get sold this idea that, it's just, you just have to take care of yourself, right? You go for those massages, you have that nice bubble bath, you do your yoga, your meditation. That's all self care, right? Make the healthy food, right? And they give you this long list of things that somebody said was self care. And she's like, I call bullshit, basically. All those things are self maintenance just to keep this body alive and healthy and functioning in the system that we live in, right? True self care is what we do that is actually nourishing to us, right? And many of us are not there, right? It's taking all of our spoons, all of our energy for the basics of self maintenance, right? And so that's where you're at right now. I just want to extend a lot of love and compassion because sometimes the expectations that we're fed are just beyond ridiculous. And even this idea of like, well, let's create a low demand lifestyle, right? Like that's one of the ways that people talk about getting out of burnout. And on paper, it's a great idea, right? Say no to anything you possibly can. Sure, makes logical sense. But for those people who are working 2 or 3 jobs to provide for their families, have kids, have other physical, mental illnesses, right? Other forms of disability on top of, autism. There's so many different variables that come in, and it can feel really heavy. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough to get myself out of burnout. I'm not doing enough, right? And we really do. I can only speak to myself because this is one thing that's kind of giving me a little hope is that I have one part to play in my burnout recovery. But there's a lot of things maybe that I don't have full control over. But just understanding some of those systems and how it's contributed to my burnout has given me more compassion for myself, right? Understanding that, hustle culture and, having to work hard, maybe it served me well for a really long time just to help me survive. But maybe now I can't. So I just kind of wanted to bringing that balance back of, yes, we of course have actions that we can take. Maybe, maybe we need help to take those actions. Maybe we need that support, supportive person or community. And maybe some things we can't fix right away or can't address. I don't know. If you guys have a response to that, that's great. Or we can start talking about like things that have helped you in your burnout recovery. I'm open to either.
Sometimes all we're doing is surviving, and that's okay. And we don't have to beat ourselves up for that. There's that saying of like the first arrow and the second arrow. The first arrow is that we're suffering, and we don't have to then shoot a second arrow at ourselves and criticize ourselves for not suffering the right way.
Yeah.
So it's okay to stick with the pain of the first arrow. I'm suffering, I'm burned out, and all I'm doing is surviving. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard and it's sad, and it's what is. Yeah. To answer your question, Cheryl, I have felt some of my, I guess, 1% actions. I took any pressure off myself to cook. I had this idea that a mature, responsible adult cooks food. And, during burnout, that's something that even when I want to, it's just too many steps, too many sensory things going on. I don't really enjoy it. My food doesn't taste good because I'm not very skilled at it. So I buy a lot of prepared foods. I buy a lot of things from the hot bar, and forgive myself for not being able to do more than that. And then I've also taken pressure off myself to have friend groups and hang out with more than one person at a time, which I find extremely, overwhelming and stressful and don't enjoy. And it doesn't mean I'll never do it. I mean, if with enough notice and I'm feeling really good, some friends ask me to hang out, maybe I will. But just giving myself that permission that you don't have to do this anymore has made me feel a lot more spacious inside. It's okay to hang out with one person at a time or just be alone. It's been really freeing to give myself that permission to no longer cook and no longer socialize in groups, which are beliefs that I was holding because I thought that's what healthy adults do. And these are really neurotypical standards.
I love those. I'm filing those ideas. I'm thinking back to burnout, like my different burnout experiences. My first burnout happened when I was 18. And we didn't know it at the time. And it was just basically, oh, well, you're severely depressed. And then it happened, several other times in my 20s and 30s. And I think the big thing for me was it kind of shows up in constant job turnover. So having a job and then doing the best I can, giving my all, and then, experiencing burnout, and then either quitting or getting fired, and then, recover and then repeat. So that's how it's shown up in my life. So for me, I did have to take one of the more drastic steps, right? I did have to leave a particular place of employment, and now I'm working for myself. So there were certain things that I could not change about that environment that were extraordinarily toxic. And I did have the privilege of being able to choose something different. Not everybody has that privilege, and I'm very, very aware of that. For me, the biggest things about burnout recovery has been understanding burnout, being in spaces where we've talked about it and understanding what it looks like, what it feels like, giving it a name. All the years of what I was feeling, actually giving it a name, understanding my nervous system, understanding my needs, understanding that it took a long time to get there, and it's okay if it takes a long time to get out. More grace and compassion for what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do. Being able to gently and slowly over the course of 3 years address the internalized ableism. Right? All of those things, they're not, very TikTok friendly. They're not going to be captionable in a nice little video. This is just the daily work of understanding my autism and my ADHD. So as much as I would have loved to be able to say oh, just do these 3 things and you're going to be good to go, it's a really unique experience for every single person that I've talked to and worked with. What led to your burnout may be different from what led to mine. So knowing the steps to get out of burnout are going to be very unique to you. But having that support, right, of circles, of workshops, of, autistic people who you can just be yourself with and unmask around, that has been huge.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cheryl. I can't one up that enough, right? People think that you're just going to have a list and you're going to follow the list and that's going to make life magically better. That's just another mask. Imagine, if we say put it that way, how ridiculous of a thought is that I'm going to get out of burnout caused by excessive masking by masking more. And you might not have thought about masking, dear listener, when it comes, or unmasking when it comes to burnout, but these are all just fucking buzz terms. Unmasking, get out of burnout, autistic self advocacy. Unmasking is either an act of getting out of burnout or actively turning the ship around from heading into it. Because as long as you are masking, and we all mask. I know some of you call yourselves high maskers, low maskers, medium maskers, ultra super high masker. Everybody masks different ways. Some of us don't mask at all. And some of us don't mask at all and can still be in burnout, which if you're in burnout, you're probably not masking so much anymore. But we are all headed towards burnout one way or another. Most of you, not all, but if you're listening to this, probably you. So an act of unmasking, it's either unmasking is how we get our needs met in a sustainable way for the long term, right? Which is what unmasking and getting out of burnout is the same thing. Or it's turning the ship around so you don't head towards that iceberg of burnout. It's understanding yourself. You're a unique person. Everyone's got their own needs, their own experiences, their own strengths. And you have to listen to yourself, because if you're just going to listen to us, and that's going to magically bring you out of burnout, if you're just seeking another resource and another resource and another article and another book, that's just trying to get your needs met the shorthanded way. That's not helping you. You are the expert of your own lived experience. You know your heart's bitterness. Only you can do it. And yeah, you need that team, you need support, you need tools. Everyone, as Cheryl said, it's going to look different. And yeah, I don't know where else to go from there. It's you got to listen to yourself. And that's the cruelest part of it, because we've been conditioned and taught from such a young age to not trust ourselves, to not listen to ourselves, that we don't know ourselves, that we're not the experts of our experience. Somebody else is. How many of you listening said, I'm not really autistic, until somebody who may or may not have a PhD or may not have ever studied autism in the academy before tells me I am? No one should take that as being anti-psychiatry. No, but think about that process. We're putting our knowing ourselves into the hands of others. How many of you have been told that your sexuality was something different, that your gender was something different because somebody else told you that you don't know yourself? Autism is not a disease to be diagnosed. So, and same thing when it comes to this. Know yourself. You know how to get out.
Yeah, that was really powerful. And just to, like I said, like you said before, I can't certainly add on to that too much, except for the fact that I just want to add my 2 cents of the gaslighting around our needs. If you've experienced that throughout your life, like most of us have, it may be really hard to acknowledge the fact that something in your life is an actual need. If you've been told your whole life, oh, it's not that bad, like just calm down, relax, don't be so sensitive, right? If you've heard those words over and over and over again, it can be really hard to see the link between, oh, all those years of me not acknowledging that these were actual needs and denying those needs is what led me into this burnout state. It's really hard to kind of look back at those years. There can be a lot of grief involved in that, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness. And it does take time to sit with those emotions and just feel them, and then start to be like, oh, I am an actual human. I'm not a machine. I do have needs, and it's okay for me to actually say that I have them and acknowledge them and meet them in whatever ways that I am personally able to. I think that was just really important. That's been a big thing in my last 3 years, anyways. Just even verbalizing the fact that this is not just a preference, this is a need. Kind of taking some of that power back. Does anyone have anything else they want to add before we wrap up? Any last words of wisdom? Okay. And there we have it, a friendly and autistic discussion around burnout recovery, which strayed into the unexpected territory of understanding how unique each person's burnout experience is, as well as the individual and structural components of autistic burnout. It also helped us realize and appreciate the fact that there are a lot of things that we actually don't have to do. And the biggest key is that understanding ourselves is what's going to be most important in recovering from burnout. As a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, peers, and anyone who lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. Thank you for listening to us talking about autistic stuff for autistic people. New episodes come out on the second and fourth Mondays of the month. Keep the conversation going on our Blue Sky feed, or send us your constructive comments and feedback by email at autisticstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, give yourself a little extra compassion whenever you're faced with the unrealistic expectations of a capitalist society.
Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.